You know the videos of cats that have shoes on? That's what I feel like when a thimble is on my thumb. So we are currently working on the biggest build I have ever made in my life because I have just not had a whole lot of luck and I've been really feeling a lot of imposter syndrome. So I am trying to prove to myself that I can make this, I can do this, and I can compete. The problem with competitions is that it doesn't really matter what you bring. It kind of matters what everyone else brings, because you can bring the cleanest work on earth and someone brings something cleaner or better or more complex than what you brought. Hi, Monty. So we're gonna try. I have been scared to work on this part because this part is the skirts, which is kind of like the main component of the cosplay. That's like the biggest part of the cosplay, and it's very, very complicated because you don't have one skirt, you have two skirts. You have the overlay, the skirt, three skirts. We've got three skirts. So you have the top skirt, the green one, which has a ton of scallops, and all of those scallops are bias bound. You have the lining of the skirt, again, a ton of inverted scallops that are all bias bound. And you also have an overlay with not designs, but like stripes on it. And this part has scared me because it is not only huge, but it's going to require a lot of draping, a lot of figuring this stuff out, and a lot of technical skill. So let's jump right in to how we're gonna do the skirts. Making a circle skirt is actually pretty easy. It's a good beginner's project for cosplay and learning how to sew. All I do, honestly, is go to the Mood Fabrics website. If you Google Mood Fabrics circle skirt calculator, you're going to get something that you can put your measurements into, and it's going to be accurate, and it's going to tell you exactly how to fold your fabric. But for this particular skirt, we're actually going to multiply that waist measurement by 3 because we are going to be making a giant circle skirt that we're then going to pleat down. And because that measurement is so big, I actually need to cut 2 circle skirts with those waist measurements multiplied by 1.5 to total a 3-part thing. And then I'm gonna sew those 2 pieces together to make one giant, huge circle skirt that I can then pleat down when I'm done. Look at that, giant circle skirt. And then I'm going to hang my circle skirt so that I can let that hem kind of even out. And that I just let it hang overnight. Just let it hang as long as you can. But yeah, circle skirts are easy to make. Now, whenever I hang a circle skirt, I get asked, why would I hang a circle skirt? That doesn't make sense. Why do I have to hang it overnight? Well, your answer is simple. Gravity. When we have fabric, it is woven a specific way, and this is non-stretch fabric, so it doesn't stretch this way, and it doesn't stretch this way, but it does stretch this way. So you can see it has more give on the bias. And a circle skirt is on the bias. So you have 2 angles of bias on a circle skirt, which means that throughout the day, with gravity, this is absolutely going to stretch. And we want to get that stretched out as much as we can before we finish the costume, before we hem it. So we have to let that hang and let gravity do its job so that we don't end up with wonky, uneven hems. I took the mirror down. I'm gonna have to find something to put into that spot because I don't like blank spaces, obviously, given all of the clutter. But the light was catching in the mirror and I don't like that. Because I've already stretched it out and made sure everything was even on the skirt, because gravity will affect the skirt and make it wonky, now it is inverted scallop time. So the hardest thing about doing inverted scallops is not that they're difficult to do, it's that you have to change your mind frame from making regular scallops to making inverted scallops. So I'm going to show you the math on how I do that. It's going to depend on what your measurements are and what your skirt measurements are, but it's pretty much the same equation every time. And then we're going to make a ton, like a shitload of inverted scallops. All right, I'm gonna do my best to explain this, but I am not a mathematician by any means. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure up from the bottom where I want the point of my scallop to sit. For inverted scallops, that's going to be the lowest point of the scallop. For regular scallops, it's going to be the highest point of the scallop. And then I create that line, I measure it, and that is X. You're now just going to take an arbitrary number for how many scallops around how much you want and try to get a nice, easy number that you're going to be able to measure and also divide by 2. So it's going to be the length of your scallop, and then you're going to go through, mark the length of that scallop, but also mark the halfway point of that scallop because you want it to be even. Measure either up or down from that halfway point. That's going to give you the depth of your scallop. Try not to make it too deep because then the scallops turn out too curved and they don't want to lay right, but I do about 2 inches. And then using my French curve, I'm just going to connect the dots, make sure I have that halfway point, and make sure it looks straight and even. That is how I do the math for my scallops. It makes sense to me. It's probably overcomplicated, but I'm not very good at math. Then I take some bias tape that I've made because that's actually going to create the scallop. I need 2 layers to create a scallop. Now I'm just sewing over those lines I've created. Make sure you're not sewing over your pins. That can really mess up your machine. They can also break and hit you in the face, and no one wants to lose an eye for cosplay. It's also important to note that I use heat-soluble pen when I mark my fabric, so as soon as I use an iron, that's going to go away. If you are in colder temperatures, that can come back when you're outside, so just be mindful. Once I get to the point of that scallop, I am going to needle down, foot up, then I'm going to make one tiny little stitch after I put my foot back down. That is just a straight stitch. Then I'm going to needle down, foot up, turn my fabric, foot down again, and continue sewing my scallop. Scallops seem scary, but they're really not that bad, I promise. Once we've got our scallop sewn, we're going to cut out that little pivot point into a little triangle. And then we're going to go in with pinking shears, or you can cut out little triangles on the curves of the scallop to hollow those out. Now I use a chopstick to turn my points. My wife's always like, why are there an uneven amount of chopsticks? Well, because I've got one. That's what I use to turn my points out, but you can use a lot of different things, including a point turner. And then once our scallops are all turned and our points are pointed, we're going to press that with an iron. Scallops are not that bad. Okay, so with the inverted scallops made, it is time to kind of really make it into a skirt. There is a red piece that goes beneath the scallops, underneath them. And all I did for that was I cut out, this is going to sound so silly and so chaotic. I lined up my skirt with the red and essentially just cut it on like another circle skirt that hit that edge. You could also just make strips of bias tape that should hypothetically work as well. After we have that top stitched together, we now have to put on the bias tape. And when I say bias tape, I don't mean a little bit of bias tape. This cosplay has so much bias tape. It's actually insane how much bias tape I made. If you want a tutorial on how to make bias tape, I have one on my corset video, which kind of explains what bias tape is, what the purpose is, and how to do it. This time we are making single fold bias tape, not double fold bias tape. So single fold bias tape to bind these edges of the scallops, because this cosplay is absolutely chaotic and ridiculous. And shout out to the designer. It's a really cute design. It's just hard to make. So when I do this, I not only have to bind all of these scallops, but I also have to make hundreds of mitered corners. So I'm just going to pin my bias tape where it goes so I can then mark these hundreds of mitered corners. And I'm going to show you how to do the mitered corners as well. All of this pinning is going to be unpinned, but this is the way my brain works. I don't know. When I do the mitered corners or mark them, I am just folding it over into a little like fold. And then I am going to mark those mitered corners exactly where they were sitting. I'm going to turn the bias tape right sides together because I'm then going to mark this weird zigzag lightning bolt shape on the inside because that's where I'm going to be stitching. Mitered corners again seem really hard, but once you get the hang of them, they're actually pretty easy. The hardest thing is when you have to do inverted versus regular mitered corners, but once you figure out the difference, it's pretty simple. And while on this particular cosplay, these mitered corners take forever and there's so many of them, mitered corners do really, really well in judging. They really impress the judges.
because they are so much hard work and a lot of people struggle with them. I'm gonna go on a soapbox now. While I was marking all of these mitered corners one after another and removing these pins, I remembered something that I think is really important to talk about with sewing, especially if you're a beginner. Do not ever put pins or needles in your mouth. I know that sounds like the most obvious thing to say, but I think we all accidentally do it at some point, and there have been multiple reports and x-ray images of people who have been putting pins or needles in their mouth and they sneeze or they inhale and then they have a pin or a needle in their lungs. This is personally a habit that I am also trying to break, because even in media, we see seamstresses putting pins in their mouth to hold them while they are working on something. Do not do it. It is not worth the risk. Like, our bodies do stupid things, and they will inhale or even swallow, all on their own without us thinking. And the last thing you want is to be working on a cosplay and I have to get my body cut open on a surgical table because I was silly and I put a pin in my mouth. Anyways, that's my soapbox. Stop putting pins in your mouth, please. Good Lord. But now that we have all of this marked, we're going to sew all of those mitered corners. So much fun. This is like where I was starting to be like, I don't want to do this anymore, but you're just gonna follow the line again. Take out your pins before you stitch over them. Sewing is dangerous. So like, just get out of these habits before you have to spend forever trying to get out of them. Anyways, we're gonna iron down our miters. Super easy. I'm gonna show you a close-up look in a minute about how it looks when it's done. It's pretty simple. It's just a lot when you're doing hundreds of them. Oh, also be careful because irons are hot and they can burn you. So, sewing is dangerous. This is all very dangerous. Try not to hurt yourself. Anyways, this whole segment has turned into sewing safety, so I'm sorry for that. I'm passionate about it. Thanks for sitting with me during my rant.
Okay, so we've got all of those miters made. That's a lot of miters. That's a lot of mitered corners. But it looks nice. It looks nice. That's how I make my mitered corners, and it always does really well in judging. And having over 100 of them, like over 150 of them, is going to do really well in judging, I think. So now we have to stitch them on. Now you can do this a couple ways. You can just top stitch it, but I have this weird obsession with not having visible stitches on things like bias tape. You will not. If you follow this, you will not be able to do a stitch in the ditch method. It is literally impossible. Your options are top stitching it, gluing it, which I guess is an option. I wouldn't advise that for competition, or slip stitching it. And because I'm insane, I am going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours slip stitching all of it. All of that bias tape. All of it. All of it. If you don't realize how much it is, like, it's essentially, this is a circle skirt times 3 because I'm then going to be pleating it down. I'm not even going to do the math for it because I don't know how to do the math for it, but it is yards and yards and yards and yards of slip stitching both the top of the bias tape and the bottom of the bias tape. So we're going to slip stitch it because competitions turn you into a crazy person, an unreasonable person, and we're going to do it.
I know I've shown you all how to do a slip stitch before, but it's one of my favorite stitches. Yes, it does take absolutely forever, but it looks so good. And it's so funny because the point of slip stitching is to make a stitch that you then can't see. So we're going in the back of the fabric and coming out through it. We are then going to grab a little edge of what we are sewing down, in this case, our bias tape. Just grab a little edge of that. And then we are going to go back down into the fabric. It is going to create a little stitch that you cannot see. Make sure you are going slow and steady because when you rush it, you will start seeing the stitches and they won't be as tight. You want to try to make them as invisible as possible. It always does really well in judging when you say that you slip stitch something. it's a good method to learn, and it ends up taking forever, but looking really good. And that's kind of what I want to do as a cosplayer. I want to do things the long way so that it looks like I didn't do it the long way. And many people who don't make their cosplays don't realize how much hand sewing we actually do. Like, I probably sewed 60% of this by hand. The machine was much easier, but most of us are using hand stitches in our cosplays. We're not just using the sewing machine. As I'm working on this, I want you guys to know the rookie mistake I made, because I have about a little over a month until this needs to be done for a competition, right? And so what did I do this weekend? I started Elden Ring. I know better than to do that. I know better. I don't have time to goof around and play Elden Ring, right? I need to focus, because just this stuff takes forever. And yeah, I could top stitch it on. I absolutely could. But cosplay competitions are about suffering, making it look like not suffering, and making some really wild decisions. So I need to get this done, but here we are. The consequences of our own mistakes. Rookie mistakes too, I know better. You would think that in this process, my entire thumb would be calloused so I wouldn't keep stabbing myself with the back of the needle, since I apparently can't function with thimbles. And like, yeah, my thumb is pretty calloused. Like, do you see all that? But also you can see where I stabbed myself because I keep hitting this one soft spot over here. It's driving me crazy. And like, I'm sorry, blood on white fabric? No, we're not doing that.
So as we finish slip stitching all of that on, all we have to do is make some box pleats to both the top and the bottom of the skirt, and then hide the hoop skirt inside. And something happened in the process of combining the top skirt and the bottom skirt together. I did not film the process of the top skirt. It is essentially the same as the bottom skirt, just the scallops are backwards. But something happened in the process of combining the two that didn't make sense. They weren't lining up correctly, and I had a little bit of a meltdown. And I didn't actually cry, but like, I spent a couple days panicking, and I figured it out off camera. The problem is that the two layers with the hoop skirt in the middle were not completely the same size. And with circle skirts generally don't have a lining anyways, but with circle skirts, they have to fit perfectly, otherwise they will not work. So I had to do a lot of figuring things out. You can kind of, in the next clip, see the panic on my face as I realize I massively screwed up.
Okay, so I needed to take some time to figure all of this out without filming it, because I had measured everything correctly and I knew I had, but something in this process happened where the lining and the top skirt were not matching up, and it was a lot of fabric that I had to deal with. So I had to end up taking a couple of inches off of the facing fabric so it would fit the lining fabric. I had to finagle a lot of stuff, and then the hoop skirt was a huge problem, but I eventually got it all together.
I also totally failed to film any part aside from a tutorial on my TikTok of the actual overlay, the white skirt with the gold and the red and the pink. All I did there was I created massive bias tape, I slip stitched it down, and then I did more mitered corners on the corner of that, and that's it. That it's really simple. It's not complex at all, and it didn't require like any thinking whatsoever.
And so, with 1 month to the day of when this needs to be done, I'm about halfway done with Miku. A lot of it is just bits and bobbins and pieces, but let me kind of show you how this fits, because this skirt itself weighs 6 pounds. So I've got a really wide waistband here, and all of this is going to be covered by the obi. I also have an apron that's going to cover this. I've got the bells in, and the back is lace up. Now, why is it lace up? I am in my 30s, and so my size tends to fluctuate, and I don't like spending all this time making something to then gain weight or lose weight or whatever. So this is going to give me the ability to resize this as I need to. I was also a little bit worried about how much this weighs and putting in something like a zipper, because by the time I problem solved all the issues that I had, I couldn't fit this skirt in the sewing machine anymore. I had to hand stitch a lot of this by hand. The layers are sewn together by hand. The waistband is sewn by hand. And like, I was not about to hand sew a zipper in only for it to possibly break. They also don't make like heavy duty separating zippers in a shorter length. I'm trying to get all of this in one image. Nope. Nope. Kind of. Can you guys see how spinny this is? That is because it's giant circle skirts. And I've got the lining. Woo! This will have bloomers underneath. Now, the downside of having this hoop skirt installed is that it is not wanting to stay down. It's wanting to ride up, which is changing the way that my pleats lay, because it doesn't want to lay right because there's a hoop skirt inside. It's all a complicated thing, but it looks good. Am I like super happy with? I wouldn't say like I'm the most happy in the world. I am proud of it though, because this is probably like the most insane, confusing thing I have ever built.
And so our skirt is complete. It is the hardest thing I've ever tried to make in my entire life, but we made it. I'm really happy with how it turned out, despite the flaws that I know that are there. But as cosplayers, we are hypercritical of our own flaws, and generally it's something that only we can see because we've spent so much time with that part. Well, what do we still have to do? We have to make the apron, the bloomers, the tail, all the little accessories. We have to style the wig and make the ears and do some other stuff too. But we are well on our way. We're about halfway done. It is smooth sailing from here on out because it's stuff I already know how to do. I'm not reinventing the wheel over here. I just want to thank you guys for watching. Again, this is a very, very small channel. We don't have any sponsors or people that it's brought to you by. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you gained something from the tutorials. If you watched this while you were making something, please let me know what you're building in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe. I don't know. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.